And for more on the Prime Minister's trip and the controversies, I'm joined by Terry Milewski. He is hosting Power and Politics this week and first reported the story for CBC News last night. Thanks for being with us, Terry. So we heard David Cochrane asking the Prime Minister how this invitation was offered in the first place. We didn't get an answer, so we'll ask you. These events are usually quite vetted, and your experience would probably tell you how this all works. So how could this happen?
Well, I guess the short answer is it couldn't possibly happen because the vetting is usually quite thorough. The RCMP and who are charged with the Prime Minister's security and CSIS, of course, are well aware of who Jaspal Atwal was and is, and they would normally have submitted guidance to the Prime Minister's office. We know so-and-so is here, we know so-and-so is there, be careful about this and that. So it is, to some degree, a mystery why there wasn't more warning of this. I notice from what I've seen of Mr. Sarai's statement, the MP Randeep Sarai, who arranged the invitation to Mr. Atwal, that he doesn't actually deny that he knew of Atwal's record. He just said that he had made a mistake. So it sounds like you could play this as, well, somebody goofed. In this case, obviously the PMO is putting the blame on MP Sarai. But how he managed to make that mistake, I think, is still a mystery.
And it's not a question on whether or not having a relationship with India would be important in the next decade. It's expected to be among the top 3 economic powers of the world. So it would be important for a Prime Minister to visit. We've seen Canadian Prime Ministers visit before. But this time around, journalists from multiple outlets, Canadians and international, are calling the Prime Minister's trip a photo op, from the elaborate clothing we're seeing the Trudeaus wear to the photos with the family in front of the Taj Mahal. So, Terry, how would you characterize Trudeau's visit to India? Well,
I wouldn't characterize it as a smashing success so far, but to be kind, let's remember that this is more or less par for the course. I mean, I went along on both of Stephen Harper's trips to India, for example. He, too, took along some MPs traveling with him who were, let's say, playing nice with the separatist wing of the Khalistani movement. And look, Mr. Harper, too, played the game to some degree, posing at the appropriate temples in turbans and garlands. He even underwent at one point a Hindu remarriage ceremony in a Hindu temple in Bangalore, I think it was. So all prime ministers are expected to go through these motions and pose for these photo ops at the Taj Mahal, although I will say that at Stephen Harper's visit to the Taj Mahal, the pollution was so bad you could hardly see it in the background of the photo op. Trudeau was just luckier with the weather. But all of that being said, we should really be judging this trip by the results, if any, particularly with respect to the growth in trade.
And speaking of the results and growth in trade, the Prime Minister did promise a great trade deal from this, but we now know Indian companies will invest $250 million in Canada, while Canadian companies will invest $750 million in India. So what does that indicate to you?
Well, I don't think it indicates much at all, except there's a vast disparity, of course, in the size of the markets. I mean, India's, 1.2 billion people now. So just do the math. I mean, for every Canadian investor who wants to invest in India, there are at least 50 Indians looking who might potentially invest in Canada. So that's just mathematics. That doesn't startle me. The real question is the rate of growth. Can Canada hook itself onto a steadily increasing volume of trade and latch onto the Indian growth rate of, 7% GDP growth annually? If Canada can get a piece of that action, and a growing piece of that action, then we might forget about him posing in nice Indian costumes.
And speaking of some important meetings he's got coming up too, perhaps the biggest on the itinerary happens soon. Prime Minister Modi has been notably absent, though, from the Prime Minister's touchdown, from his visit. He wasn't there on the tarmac to greet Prime Minister Trudeau, but the two leaders will be meeting again tomorrow. So how do you think that'll go? What are you going to be watching for?
Well, allow me again to point out that this is a bipartisan problem, the absence of Modi at the airport. Stephen Harper, on neither of his trips, was greeted by the Prime Minister at the airport. Prime Minister Modi, though, is known to go beyond the requirements of protocol. He welcomed Bibi Netanyahu from Israel I believe, at the airport. So you can read something into that if you will, but not too much, I would say. Prime Minister Modi has already thrown Prime Minister Trudeau a little bit of a lifeline, I think, by looking forward to the meeting tomorrow and strengthening relations. Nothing about this embarrassment with the wrong guy being invited to the reception. And remember, of course, that Modi may not want to make too much of that anyway, because the more he says about it, the more it throws a rather unflattering light on the failure of the Indian government, which made exactly the same mistake. They gave Atwal a visa to visit India despite his record. So I think, again, we should judge that meeting by its results. Modi's agenda has been growth. He's sold himself to the Indian people as the man who is going to revolutionize the Indian economy. And so he will be interested in trade and growth. I think he will be less interested in what Trudeau wears.
Lots to watch, lots to digest. Thanks for this, Terry. That's the CBC's Terry Molesky in the Power and Politics studio in Ottawa.
Thanks.